The storm came without warning. One moment, the sky over Frontier Valley was only dark with distant clouds. The next moment, the wind screamed like a living creature, carrying dust, ice, and shards of stone across the open plains. Everyone on the colony whirled to Tyrannies, for knew what a gravel storm could do. It could cut skin. It could destroy metal. It could kill in minutes. Inside a small reinforced shelter on the ridge, Mark Wren, one of the last humans assigned to the distant survey post, heard the first heavy strikes of rock against the metal walls. He checked the readouts again, air pressure dropping, wind speed rising, the storm front spreading fast. He was alone as usual. Humans were rare on this world. The locals, the tall, horn-crowned dreen, did not trust the species. They kept their distance. Mark had learned to live with silence, learned to live with lonely meals, quiet nights, and days spent collecting data for a colony that rarely spoke to him. He reached for his helmet. Even inside the shelter, the seals sometimes shook loose in storms like this. Then, a distant scream. It was faint, but sharp enough to cut through the howl of the wind. Mark froze. Nobody should be outside. Not in this. Another scream, closer this time. Mark didn't think. He grabbed the emergency beacon, hit the pressure release on the inner door, and leaned into the storm's force. He only opened a crack, just enough to see out. A figure stumbled toward him, almost falling forward with every step. The storm pushed her sideways like a rag doll. Her cloak was shredded, her skin bleeding from dozens of sharp cuts. 2 long horns curved from her forehead, and a glowing blue crest ran down her shoulders. A young dreen woman, running, falling, trying to reach him. Mark forced the door open wider and reached out with both arms. She collapsed into him, breathless and shaking. Together, they stumbled back inside. He slammed the emergency lock, and the door hissed shut as the shelter lights flickered back to full brightness. The woman fell to her knees, coughing and gasping. Her crest lights dimmed, an exhausted reflex. Mark grabbed a med kit and moved closer. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now. Let me help." But the moment she lifted her head and saw his face, she froze, absolutely still. Her eyes widened, her pupils tightening into 2 sharp slits. Her body shook, not from the cold, not from pain, but from fear. A human," she whispered. Her voice shook like broken glass. Mark stopped. He raised both hands slowly, showing he held no weapons. He had seen this reaction before, but never this strong. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm human, but you're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She crawled backward until her horns touched the metal wall. Her hands trembled as she tried to activate a wrist comm, but the device sparked uselessly. "Storm damage. Please," she said, "do not come closer." Mark stayed exactly where he was. He had learned long ago that fear could turn into panic, and panic could turn into something worse. "It's all right," he repeated. "You're injured. I can help. I have supplies." "No!" Her breath trembled. "I was told humans are dangerous, unpredictable, violent." Mark exhaled slowly. "You met the wrong humans." For a moment, neither of them moved. Outside, the storm struck the shelter with a force that made the floor vibrate. Dust seeped through the smallest cracks. The lights flickered again. If they stayed like this, silent and frozen, the temperature would drop fast. The life support system was old and always weakened under pressure. They needed heat. They needed to seal the cracks. They needed cooperation. "What's your name?" Mark asked quietly. She hesitated, watching him like he might attack at any second. "Ari Ven," she finally whispered. "Okay, Ari Ven. I'm Mark." He pointed to the med kit. "Your arms and face are cut. I can give you a clean seal. Not medicine, just a gel. Nothing harmful." Ari Ven's breathing stayed fast and shaky, but she didn't look away. That was a start. Mark slowly pushed the medkit toward her across the floor. She stared at it, then at him, then back at the kit. Her voice was still small. "You saved me." "Why?" "Because you were in danger," Mark said simply. "That's enough reason." Ari Ven looked confused by the answer. She seemed to study him carefully, his plain uniform, his steady posture, the way he kept his hands visible. Finally, with trembling fingers, she touched the medkit, but she didn't open it. Not yet. Outside, the storm grew louder. The shelter lights dimmed to emergency yellow. Mark took a slow breath. This wasn't just a storm. A gravel storm of this size lasted hours, sometimes the entire night. If they stayed in silence and fear until morning, things could go very wrong. "We're going to be stuck here together," Mark said, "at least until sunrise." Ari Van swallowed hard. "I never thought I would meet a human. Not like this." Mark offered a small, tired smile. "No one meets me in good weather." For the first time, Ari Van's eyes softened just a little. The storm roared, the metal walls groaned, and two strangers, one human, one alien, sat together in a shelter barely strong enough to survive a night. And Ari Van still didn't know the truth. Mark hadn't told her why he was posted alone on this distant ridge, why the colony kept him away from others, or what the dream leaders believed he was capable of. But before the storm ended, she would find out, and it would change everything. The storm outside grew even stronger as hours passed. The shelter shook again and again, as if some giant creature struck it from every direction. Ari Van kept her back against the wall, tense and alert, watching every tiny movement Mark made. Her crest lights flickered, weak from exhaustion, but still glowing with worry. Mark checked the power readings for the third time. The numbers were dropping. Not fast, but enough to make him frown. The old shelter was never meant to face a storm this size. Without stronger heat and stable air pressure, both he and Ari Van could be in trouble before dawn. "You're still bleeding," Mark said softly. "Please use the gel. It will clean the cuts and stop the stinging." Ari Van looked down at her arms. The wounds were shallow but painful. Dreen's skin was tougher than human skin, but the storm's flying stones cut like razors. She hesitated again, then slowly opened the med kit. Inside were simple items: bandage rolls, sanitizer, pressure patches, and a tube of biogel. She lifted the gel carefully, studying the label as if expecting hidden danger. Mark sighed inwardly. Fear made everything slower. "You can apply it yourself," he said. "You don't have to come near me." Her eyes lifted at that. Something about his calm voice made her pause. With one long breath, she squeezed a small amount of gel and touched it to a cut on her arm. The gel shimmered softly and sealed the wound. Ari Van blinked, surprised. "It does not burn. It's meant for field injuries," Mark said. "Low pain, fast seal." Ari Van applied more of the gel to her other cuts. Slowly, her breathing evened out. The shaking in her hands lessened. When she was done, she closed the kit and pushed it across the floor, halfway back to him, but not all the way. A cautious gesture. Mark didn't push it closer. He simply nodded. Silence filled the shelter for several long minutes. Outside, the storm screamed like an angry world refusing to calm down. Ari Van finally spoke, her voice low. "You live here alone?" "For now," Mark answered. "Survey post-duty." "That must feel empty." Mark gave a short laugh. "You get used to it." Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, studying him with what looked like confusion. "We have heard stories," she said quietly. "Stories of humans who lose control. Stories of those who act with sudden violence." Mark looked down at his gloves. "You heard about the war." Ari Van tensed instantly. "So it is true? There was a war," Mark said. "Not here. Not with your people. But humans, we weren't always peaceful." Ari Van watched him carefully. "Then why send one of you here?" "That," Mark said, "is a long story." Ari Van didn't push. She only pulled her knees closer to her chest. But Mark could tell she wanted answers. The shelter hummed softly as the life support system strained. Mark checked the controls again. The heat coil was weakening. Soon, the temperature would drop. "We'll need to insulate the door gap," Mark said. "Help me find anything we can use." Ari Van hesitated, then slowly stood. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, but she began searching through the emergency storage compartments on her side of the shelter. Mark gathered spare lining from the bench cushions. They avoided each other's eyes at first, moving like two animals forced into the same space. But eventually, Ari Ven handed him a strip of insulation material, careful not to brush his hand. "Thank you," Mark said. Her crest flickered softly, the light shifting to a calmer color. "It is logical to cooperate in danger." Together, they secured the insulation along the door seal. The temperature stabilized a little. The wind continued to blast outside, but the shelter felt slightly safer now. When the work was done, Ari Ven sat again near the wall, closer to Mark this time, though still guarded. "You said earlier," she began, "that I met the wrong humans. What did you mean?" Mark leaned back against the metal. He looked tired in a way Ari Ven recognized as old and heavy. "Some humans did terrible things," he said quietly. "Some believed power was all that mattered. Some believed other species were less worthy." Ari Ven's eyes softened. "And you?" "I was a soldier," Mark said. "A long time ago. I saw too much violence. I left that life." Ari Ven studied him closely now. She could sense something hidden beneath his calm voice. Regret, maybe, or guilt. "You were sent here," she said slowly. "Not because you chose it. Because someone wanted you far from others." Mark did not answer immediately. The silence itself was a truth. Ari Ven's crest dimmed with understanding. "They fear you." "Maybe," Mark said. "Or maybe they fear the past." Ari Ven's gaze lowered to her hands. She thought of the things she'd been told her entire life. That humans were unpredictable. That humans were dangerous. That their past was filled with blood. But this man had saved her. He risked himself in the storm without hesitation. He offered help without force. She looked at him again. "You are not what the stories say." Mark smiled a little. Stories rarely get it right. Another loud strike hit the shelter, making both of them jump. Dust fell from the ceiling. The storm was growing even worse. Ari Ven hugged herself, shivering. "Will the shelter hold?" "It will," Mark said. "If it doesn't, we'll hold it together." Ari Ven looked at him, really looked, and something small but important shifted inside her. A tiny crack in the wall of fear. She didn't move closer, but she didn't pull away either. For now, in the middle of a roaring storm, a human and a dream were forced to rely on each other. And by sunrise, the truth about Mark's past, the truth that kept him isolated on this ridge, the storm kept pounding the shelter like a giant beating its fists against metal. Ari Ven and Mark sat on opposite sides of the small room, the air between them filled with tension, fear, and something new, uncertain curiosity. Ari Ven rubbed her arms, trying to keep warm, even with the insulation they added. The temperature dropped a little more every hour. The emergency heater hummed weakly, struggling to push warmth into the cold air. She looked at Mark again. He sat still, staring at the floor. His shoulders were heavy. His eyes were tired. Something about that quiet sadness made her speak. "You said you were a soldier," she said softly. "What kind?" Mark took a long breath before answering. "A bad one." Ari Ven frowned. "Bad how?" Mark didn't look up. "Because I followed orders without thinking. Because I did things I'm not proud of. Because when people around me became violent, I didn't stop them." Ari Ven's voice lowered. "You hurt others?" Mark closed his eyes. "Yes." Ari Ven stared at him. Her crest dimmed, then brightened again. The stories she'd heard her whole life came back to her. Stories of human brutality, human anger, human lack of control. And now she was sitting in a tiny shelter with one who admitted it was true. But then she remembered something else. This same man had saved her life only hours earlier. "Are you dangerous now?" she asked. Mark finally lifted his head. His eyes were calm, steady, and almost painfully honest. "I tried very hard not to be." The shelter lights flickered again, and a sudden sharp gust made the walls groan loudly. Ari Ven flinched and grabbed the bench beside her. Mark stood quickly. The support brace might be shifting. He took a small toolkit and moved toward the wall. Ari Ven instinctively leaned back, startled by his sudden motion. Mark paused at once and raised his hands. "I'm just checking the brace. Nothing else." Ari Ven's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She nodded awkwardly, then forced herself to stay still. Her fear of humans was deep in her blood, taught since childhood, but she didn't want to jump every time he moved. Mark crouched beside the wall and tightened the brace bolts. Ariven watched him carefully, his movements slow and precise, never rushed, never threatening. When he finished, he sat again, breathing a little harder. "Storm's pushing harder than I expected," he said. "How long until sunrise?" Ariven asked. Mark checked the timer. 6 hours. Ariven sighed. "It feels like forever." Mark gave a small smile. Storms always do. A long stretch of silence followed. The wind screamed. The heater hummed. The shelter trembled. Ariven hugged her legs and finally asked a question that had been burning inside her. "Why did your people send you here alone? Why a remote post?" Mark rubbed his hands together, warming them. He didn't answer right away. It was a question he hoped she would not ask. But she deserved honesty, especially after everything. "I wasn't sent here to do research," he said quietly. "Not really. The colony leaders put me here because they didn't want me around others." Ariven's eyes widened. "Because of the war?" "Because of what I did," Mark said, "and because they think, or thought, that I might lose control again." Ariven leaned forward. "Do you believe that too?" Mark stared at his hands. "Sometimes. I try not to. But the past doesn't disappear just because we want it to." Ariven watched him more closely than before. This human was not what the story said. He was not wild. He was not angry. He was not unpredictable. He was broken and trying to fix himself. "You saved me," Ariven said. "If you were truly dangerous, why would you do that?" Mark smiled weakly. "Because I would rather help someone now than hurt someone again. Because I don't want to be that person anymore." Ariven's crest glowed a faint soft blue, her people's color for empathy. She didn't mean to show it, but she couldn't hide it either. Mark noticed. "Does that mean you trust me now?" Ariven stiffened. "I don't know." "That's fair." The storm slammed the shelter again. A metal beam cracked loudly above them. Ariven gasped as dust rained down. Mark jumped to his feet. That was the support on the north side. "We need to reinforce it." Ariven pushed herself up despite shaking legs. "Tell me what to do." They moved together, cautiously but with growing teamwork. Mark held a brace in position, while Ariven screwed it into place with a tool she barely understood. Their hands never touched, but they moved closer without fear, controlling every breath. When the brace was secure, they both stepped back, breathing hard. "You're good at this," Mark said. Ariven blinked. "At holding metal?" "At staying calm," Mark corrected. Ariven looked away, flustered. "I was not calm." "You stayed anyway," Mark said gently. "That matters." Ariven sat down again, slower this time. Something warm spread in her chest. A strange feeling, not comfort, not trust, but a beginning of both. Mark returned to his side and said quietly, "Thank you for helping." Ariven nodded once. "Thank you for not being the monster I feared." The storm outside roared like a beast trying to break in. Inside the shelter, something else was breaking, the wall between fear and understanding. But sunrise was still far away, and something even more dangerous than the storm was coming. Something hunting in the storm winds, drawn by movement and heat. And neither Mark nor Ariven had noticed it yet. The storm outside did not calm. Instead, the wind grew sharper, wilder, carrying heavier stones and chunks of ice that slammed against the shelter like small explosions. Every strike made Ariven flinch. Mark listened with narrowed eyes, focusing not on the storm, but on something beneath it, subtle vibrations, heavier impacts, patterns that didn't match the wind. Something else was out there. He stood again and pressed his ear lightly against the metal wall. The cold bit into his skin, but he ignored it. Ariven watched him carefully. "What is it?" she asked. Mark raised a hand for silence. There, beneath the roaring wind, came a heavy thump, then a dragging sound, then another thump. Slow, too slow and heavy to be debris, and moving in a steady line. Ariven's crest dimmed in fear. What creature walks in a storm like this? Mark's jaw tightened. Not a creature. Something worse. Ari Van stepped closer despite herself. What do you mean? Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he checked the exterior sensors on the small screen near the door. Most of the sensors were blinded by dust and ice, but one faint reading blinked on and off, a large heat signature moving slowly around the shelter. Ari Ven's breath caught. Is it alive? Yes, Mark said. Very alive. She frowned. But nothing from our world can survive open air in a gravel storm. That's the problem, Mark said quietly. It's not from your world, and not from mine. Ari Ven froze. Mark took a deep breath. Some years ago, before I was sent here, we fought against a species known as the Gale Car. They don't fear storms. They use them. They hunt in them. Ari Ven felt her throat tighten. Hunt what? Mark looked right at her. Anything warm. A loud, scraping sound ran along the outer wall, long and slow, like claws testing the metal. Ari Ven backed away. No, that cannot be real. The Gale Car are only myths among my people. They're real, Mark said, and one of them is outside. A sharp clang hit the roof. Ari Ven cried out as dust rained down. Mark grabbed her arm instinctively to steady her, then quickly released when he felt her tense. Sorry, he said. It's all right, she whispered. She didn't step away. The shelter shook again as something heavy landed near the rear wall. Not a stone, not wind, something with weight, purpose. Ari Ven's voice trembled. Why would a Gale Car be here? Mark checked the failing sensors again. They're drawn to heat, movement, shelter lights, and storms make it easier for them to get close without being seen. Ari Ven hugged herself tightly. Can it break through? Mark looked around the small shelter. If it tries long enough, yes. Ari Ven closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She had never been this close to a human before today. Now she was hiding from a creature she thought only existed in old warnings told to children. How big are they? She asked. Mark swallowed. Taller than me. Much stronger. And very fast. Their claws can cut through armor if they strike hard enough. Ari Ven's shoulders shook. We cannot fight that. Mark didn't argue. We just need to survive until sunrise. It will leave when the daylight returns. They hate the sun. Another scrape dragged across the wall, longer this time. Then a hard bang, as if the creature was testing weak spots. Ari Ven covered her mouth to quiet her breathing. Mark moved toward the supply shelf and took a long metal bar, the closest thing to a weapon the shelter had. Ari Ven stared at him. You intend to fight it? She whispered. If it gets inside, Mark said, I won't have a choice. Ari Ven looked at the bar, then at him. Her voice cracked. You will die. Maybe, Mark said calmly. But you won't. Ari Ven's eyes widened. Why would you say that? Mark met her gaze with steady seriousness. Because I've treated enough old wounds. Time to protect something instead of regret something. Ari Ven didn't know what to say. Her heart pounded in fear and confusion. This human, whom she had feared only hours earlier, was now preparing to fight a nightmare creature for her safety. Outside, the steps grew louder, closer. The metal buckled slightly where the creature pressed. Ari Ven whispered, We must hide. There's nowhere to hide, Mark said. And if we turn off the heat, we'll freeze before morning. The creature bumped the wall again. Harder. A thin crack appeared in the insulation. Ari Ven gasped. It found a weak point. Mark stood ready with the metal bar. Stay behind me. Ari Ven stepped closer, almost beside him. I may not be strong like you, but I will not hide while you face this alone. Mark looked at her in surprise. She was trembling, but her eyes were determined. Before he could answer, the creature slammed the wall again, this time with enough force to dent the metal inward. Ari Ven shrieked and grabbed Mark's arm. He pulled her behind him with one steady motion. The shelter creaked. Another hit like that, and the wall might break. Mark tightened his grip on the metal bar. Ari Ven, if it gets through, we run to the emergency hatch on the floor. It leads to the old storage tunnels. Ari Ven nodded shakily. I understand. Another heavy slam. The wall buckled deeper. A faint, low growl vibrated through the metal. Ari Ven's eyes widened in horror. It knows we're inside. Mark steadied himself. Then we make sure it doesn't get in. But the next impact sounded different. Not like claws. Not like a strike. It sounded like a deliberate, intelligent blow. As if something outside was not just attacking, but testing, and learning, and preparing. The shelter walls shook again, but this time the sound was different. Too sharp, too focused. Ari Ven stepped closer to Mark, unable to stop herself. He stood still, gripping the metal bar with both hands, his eyes fixed on the dented wall. The creature outside scraped its claws across the metal slowly, like it was thinking, like it was choosing where to strike next. Ari Ven whispered, "Does it understand we are here?" Mark nodded once. Gale Carr aren't mindless. They're hunters. They test. They wait. And when they're sure... He didn't finish. Ari Ven swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "For now," Mark said, "we stay quiet. Moving will only make it more excited." But the storm suddenly shifted, the wind howling even louder. A burst of dust struck the shelter, and the roof vibrated violently. Ari Ven clutched Mark's sleeve for balance, and he steadied her quickly. The creature responded with a heavy bang, as if the storm itself gave it courage. Ari Ven's voice cracked. "It's not leaving." "No," Mark agreed. "It isn't." The creature moved along the outer wall. Its steps were slow, heavy, deliberate. Ari Ven listened to them with fear tightening every breath inside her chest. It stopped at the very corner where the insulation crack had formed. Mark cursed under his breath. That spot's weaker than the others. Before they could move, a massive blow hit the wall. A loud metallic scream filled the shelter. The dent grew deeper, this time almost punching through. Ari Ven stumbled backward, trembling. "It will break in." Mark stepped forward, gripping the metal bar tightly. "If it does, we head for the hatch. Do you remember where it is?" Ari Ven nodded shakily. "Under the storage crate." "Good. Don't open it yet. It will hear." Another slam. This one left a small hole, a puncture, a single, sharp claw tip pushed through the metal. Ari Ven cried out and covered her mouth. Mark raised the bar. "Stay behind me." The claw withdrew. Everything went still, quiet. Only the storm continued raging outside. Ari Ven whispered, "Is it gone?" Mark didn't answer. He waited. Then, bam! The creature slammed the same spot with full force. The metal bent inward, cracking like thin ice. Ari Ven stumbled backward and fell to her knees. Mark knelt beside her, helping her up quickly. "We go now," he said. "Quiet, fast." Ari Ven nodded, shaking. Together, they slid the storage crate aside, careful not to scrape it loudly across the floor. The metal hatch beneath was old but strong. Ari Ven whispered, "How far do the tunnels go?" "Far enough," Mark said, pulling at the hatch handle. "But we need..." Another slam cut him off. The dent grew into a tear. A dark, clawed hand forced its way through, scraping the air inside. Ari Ven gasped so loudly the creature heard her. It hissed, a deep, rattling sound filled with hunger. Mark pulled the hatch open with all his strength. Cold air rushed upward. A narrow ladder led down into darkness. "Go!" Mark commanded. Ari Ven hesitated, fear locking her legs. Mark grabbed her shoulders. "Ari Ven, trust me. Go!" For the first time since entering the shelter, she didn't question him. She climbed onto the ladder and began descending quickly, the rungs shaking under her trembling hands. The creature hit the wall again, this time tearing a wider hole. A massive, long-finger hand reached inside, claws scraping the floor. Mark backed toward the hatch. "Faster, Ari Ven." She climbed down the last few steps and shouted, "I'm clear." Mark dropped into the tunnel behind her and pulled the hatch shut just as the creature's claw slashed across the edge. Sparks flew. The metal bent inward, but the hatch held. Above them, the creature let out a furious, echoing roar. Ari Ven covered her ears. "It will break through." "No," Mark said, panting. The hatch is reinforced. It was built for war shelters. But if it gets inside, Ari Venn said, voice shaking, how long until it finds the hatch? Mark grabbed a small lantern and turned it on. The dim yellow light filled the narrow tunnel. Dust drifted in the cold air. We moved deeper, Mark said. The tunnels connect to an old mining passage. It's narrow, too narrow for something that size. Ari Venn nodded, but fear still clouded her eyes. Will the storm end soon? Not soon enough, Mark said. They walked through the tunnel. Ari Venn first, Mark behind her. The walls were rough rock, wet from condensation. The ground was uneven and slippery. Ari Venn touched the wall to steady herself. Mark, why didn't you run first? You could have left me and survived. Mark answered without hesitation. I don't run from people who need help. But you fought in a war, she whispered. Your stories say humans only protect their own. Mark shook his head. Not all of us. Ari Venn's crest glowed faintly again, a soft blue of trust. But before either could speak more, a sound echoed through the tunnel. A heavy, distant thud. Ari Venn froze. Mark, did it? No, Mark said. That didn't come from above. A second thud echoed, closer this time. Then another. Ari Venn's voice quivered. Mark, something is down here too. Mark raised the lantern higher, trying to see down the dark passage. The air shifted. A shape moved in the darkness ahead. Slowly, quietly, and it wasn't alone. Mark whispered only one word. Run. The narrow tunnel echoed with heavy, uneven footsteps. Mark and Ari Venn ran as fast as they could, their boots slipping on wet stone. Dust and small rocks tumbled from the ceiling, shaken loose by the storm and the creature above. The lantern in Mark's hand cast long, flickering shadows that danced along the walls, making the tunnel seem alive. Ari Venn's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Mark, what is chasing us? She panted. Mark didn't answer immediately. He kept one eye on the dim light ahead. I don't know exactly, he admitted. Something big. Something that follows heat and movement. But it can't fit through these tunnels. Ari Venn pressed closer, her shoulders brushing against his back. Then why do I feel like it's right behind us? Because it's smart, Mark said. It knows we're human and dream. It's testing, trying to scare us. It thinks it can make us panic. Another distant thump echoed to the tunnel, and Ari Venn flinched. Her crest dimmed slightly, the nervous signal of her species. Mark slowed slightly and whispered, Keep calm. If we panic, we make mistakes. Mistakes can get us killed. Ari Venn nodded, trying to steady herself. The tunnels twisted and turned sharply. Mark knew them well. They led to an abandoned mining network built decades ago, long before the colony arrived. Some passages were so narrow that only one person could pass at a time, perfect for escape if they could reach them. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed behind them. It was different from the thumps. Deeper, more deliberate. Ari Venn's skin prickled, her fingers gripping the sides of the tunnel. It knows we're afraid, Mark whispered. Stay close. The tunnel opened slightly into a small cavern, just wide enough for the two of them. Mark stopped for a second to catch his breath and listened. The growling was closer now, mixed with scratching, like claws dragging along stone. Ari Venn whispered, It's learning the tunnels. Maybe, Mark said, gripping his metal bar tighter. Or it's just following our heat. Either way, we can't stay here. He took the lead again, moving deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels. The narrow walls forced Ari Venn to move carefully. Every misstep could mean a twisted ankle or a fall. But she didn't complain. She had trusted Mark to save her once. And now she would follow him into the dark, no matter what lurked behind. Suddenly, the tunnel slanted downward sharply. Ari Venn almost stumbled, but Mark grabbed her arm. Careful, he said. This leads to the old ventilation shafts. They're safe, but you have to be steady. The thumps behind them grew louder. Something large and heavy was moving fast, faster than Mark expected. Ari Venn's eyes widened. It's close, she cried. Yes, but stay calm, Mark said. We have a plan. He led her to a small side passage, almost hidden by jagged rock. It was a tight squeeze, too narrow for anything larger than them to pass. Mark crouched low and motioned for Ari Venn to follow. They slipped into the passage, and the sound of claws dragging over stone grew fainter behind them. Ari Venn exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Is it gone?" she asked. "Not gone," Mark said quietly. "It's waiting. It can't fit here, but it knows we escaped." Ari Venn's crest glowed faintly again, this time in a calmer blue. She studied Mark. "You're brave." Mark shook his head. "I'm not brave. I just know fear won't help us survive." They moved further into the ventilation shafts. The air grew colder and damper, but the narrow walls shielded them from the worst of the storm above. Ari Venn noticed a difference immediately. Less wind, less dust, almost no sound from outside. For the first time in hours, she felt a small spark of hope. Mark slowed and turned to her. "We'll rest here for a moment, but only a moment. The tunnels go deep. We can't stay in one place too long." Ari Venn sank against the wall, exhausted. Her crest flickered softly. I never thought I'd survive this." "You're stronger than you think," Mark said. "We'll get through it. Together." Ari Venn looked at him. She had been terrified of humans, convinced they were unpredictable and dangerous. But now, after hours of fear of storms, of claws scraping metal above, this human, Mark, had saved her life twice. "You are not like the humans I was taught to fear," she said quietly. "I'm not," Mark admitted. "But I understand why you might think that. My past, my mistakes, they make it hard to prove it sometimes." Ari Venn reached out slowly, touching his arm lightly. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Trust, connection. Mark didn't flinch. He gave her a reassuring nod. Another distant thump echoed, reminding them that danger was still very near. Mark pulled at her feet. "Time to move. The ventilation shafts lead to an old supply room. From there, we can reach the higher ridges, safety, daylight, and hopefully the end of the storm." Ari Venn nodded, gripping the walls for balance. The creature above had not given up, but she no longer felt paralyzed by fear. She looked at Mark, and for the first time, she felt a spark of certainty. This human, this strange, mysterious survivor, would not let her die. And maybe, just maybe, they could survive the storm together. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, cold and uncertainty. But the sound of pursuit was fading. Step by step, they moved forward toward survival, and toward a dawn neither had yet imagined. Mark led Ari Venn through the narrow ventilation shafts, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. The air was damp and cold, but the shelter of the tunnel kept them safe from the storm above. Every step was tense, every shadow a potential threat. Yet something had changed. Both of them were no longer paralyzed by fear. They had survived the storm so far, and the night had forced them to trust each other. Finally, after what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Old support beams held the ceiling, and the faint glow from Mark's lantern revealed crates of abandoned supplies. Food rations, spare tools, and broken machinery. "This should be safe for now," Mark whispered, setting the lantern on a crate. He sank onto the floor, exhausted. "We can rest for a few minutes." Ari Venn dropped down beside him, her breathing still fast but steadier than before. She studied him quietly. "Mark, I don't understand. Why would you risk your life to save me, a dream who was taught to fear humans?" Mark's eyes, tired and shadowed, met hers. "Because I don't want to live in fear. Because I don't want my past to define what I do today. And because no one deserves to die in a storm alone." Ari Venn looked down, crest lights flickering softly. Her thoughts ran fast. Stories of humans had painted them as violent and unpredictable. Yet here was one human, proving every story wrong. Saving her, protecting her, trusting her even when she had barely dared to trust him. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. Maybe the stories are wrong. Maybe humans can change. Mark's lips curved into a small, tired smile. "Some of us can." Outside, the storm continued, but its fury was weakening. The wind's howl grew lower. the gravel less aggressive, and for the first time since the night began, a hint of light appeared in the east. Sunrise, Mark said. It should drive the Gale car away. Ari Ven's eyes widened. The creature will leave? Yes, Mark confirmed. They cannot tolerate sunlight. It's their weakness. For the first time, a small spark of hope flickered in Ari Ven's heart. She looked at Mark and realized something important. He had not just saved her life. He had taught her a lesson that no story, no myth, no warning had ever conveyed. That fear alone was not truth. That trust, courage, and cooperation could exist even between humans and Dreen. Mark glanced at her. You're not hurt anymore? No, she said, smiling faintly. The gel healed my wounds, but more than that, your actions healed something inside me. Fear, maybe, or doubt. Mark shook his head with a tired laugh. Don't get philosophical on me now. We need to get out before the creature starts testing again. Ari Ven nodded, standing and brushing dust from her cloak. Together, they carefully made their way through the tunnels toward the ridge above. The storm was nearly over. The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the valley below golden. As they reached the exit, the ground outside was soft from rain and storm debris. The shelter, battered and broken, lay behind them. The hole in the metal wall revealed claw marks, a warning of the creature's strength. But it was gone. The Gale car had retreated into the shadows of the storm, vanishing with the light. Ari Ven took a deep breath of fresh air. The smell of wet rock and soil filled her senses. It's over, she whispered. Not quite, Mark said, looking toward the valley. Surviving the storm was only the first step. Now we have to survive the world outside. She looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly. I think we can. Mark nodded. Together, they walked slowly toward the ridge's top. Below, the colony lay peaceful under the early morning light. Ari Ven realized that this world, harsh, dangerous, unpredictable, was not just a place of fear. It was a place of survival, courage, and unexpected alliances. Mark, she began hesitantly, I want others to know the truth. That humans, some humans, can be trusted. Mark glanced at her, a small smile touching his lips. I think you've already started. You survived the storm. And you helped me survive it too. She nodded, understanding. In that moment, she knew something profound had changed, not just in her, but in both of them. Fear had been replaced by trust. Isolation had been replaced by partnership. And the stories of humans being dangerous were no longer the only truth. Together, they stood at the ridge, looking down at the valley below. The storm had passed. The sunlight was warm on their skin, and the winds carried only calm. For the first time since she had fled into the shelter, Ari Ven smiled freely. Thank you, she said softly, her crest glowing brighter in the morning light. Mark shrugged, a hint of humor in his tired eyes. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right. Ari Ven laughed quietly, a sound mingling relief and disbelief. Then, I suppose that's more than enough. They stayed there for a moment, side by side, watching the dawn. A human and a Dreen. Two survivors from two different worlds, standing together at the edge of a storm-ravaged frontier. And for the first time, Ari Ven felt something she had never felt before. Hope. The storm was over. The danger passed, but the lessons remained. Trust could grow in the unlikeliest places. Courage could come from the most unexpected people. And together, perhaps humans and Dreen could face even the deadliest storms ahead. The valley below glimmered with sunlight. Above, the sky cleared, leaving only calm and the promise of a new day. And as they descended toward the colony, Ari Ven knew that this story, the story of fear, survival, and unexpected friendship, would be told for generations to come. The end would no longer be a secret.